Well, we are following some developing news this morning. A man will be in court today, suspected of killing a woman found dead in her apartment on Christmas Day. Now, Portland police arrested Michael Kirkland at his Southwest Portland home. He's facing aggravated murder charges in the death of Jaime Larson. Detectives say evidence at the scene led them to Kirkland.
Christmas Day in Portland. Twinkling lights lit up apartment windows. Children unwrapped gifts. Families gathered for warmth and joy. But inside apartment 2073 on Southwest Park Avenue, something far more sinister was unfolding. At the very hour most homes rang with laughter, 33-year-old Jaime Larson lay dead in her bathroom, strangled with her own clothing, sexually assaulted and mutilated. Her killer? A man she had only met hours earlier. A brief encounter that spiraled into horror. There was no long-standing feud, no bitter betrayal, just a random, predatory act of violence that stunned an entire city. Jaime's apartment wasn't in a forgotten alley. It was blocks from Portland State University, in a neighborhood considered safe. And that's what made the terror cut deeper. How does someone meet a man on Christmas Day and end up murdered by nightfall? 9 days later, as her family laid flowers at her memorial, U.S. Marshals knocked on a nearby door, and the truth began to unravel. This is not just the story of a murder. This is a story about a life stolen, a community shaken, and the unbearable question that still echoes through every Christmas since. How did this happen? Jaime Larson wasn't a name anyone in Portland expected to mourn that Christmas. To her family, she was simply Jaime. Vibrant, playful, full of warmth. They called her Red Sunshine, a nickname that somehow said it all. She had a bright personality, a quick smile, and a way of showing up for people when they needed her most. She was the kind of person who usually stood behind the camera at family gatherings, always capturing the joy of others while quietly spreading her own. She was just 33 years old. She was building a life, one marked by independence and hope. Her apartment on Southwest Park Avenue was just south of Portland State University, tucked in a neighborhood known more for its safety and city charm than for headlines and crime scenes. Michael James Kirkland wasn't a stranger to the criminal justice system. He had lived in Portland for years, blending into the background of city life like many others with a troubled past. But behind the anonymity of his apartment on Southwest Clay Street, just blocks from Jaime's building, lurked a history of violence that never quite made headlines, until it did. Kirkland was 39 years old in December of 2012. According to records, he had prior convictions for assault, and a reputation that quietly followed him through the corridors of Portland's legal system. He wasn't a man known for stability. His past was marked by aggression. And though the full extent of his criminal history remains sealed behind court dockets and police logs, what is known is chilling enough. He had been in trouble before, but never like this. He lived close, far too close, to Jaime Larson. Just a few blocks separated his apartment from hers. That proximity may have been coincidence, or it may have been fate. But what's most disturbing is this. The two had never met before Christmas Day. There was no previous relationship, no long-standing feud. Just a brief encounter, an accidental crossing of paths that would end in murder. The hours between Michael Kirkland meeting Jaime Larson and her death were few, but within them, a nightmare unfolded that would devastate a family and paralyze a city in disbelief. What began as an ordinary holiday in Portland became, for Jaime, the setting of her final, most horrifying moments. On Christmas Day 2012, Jaime crossed paths with Kirkland, perhaps in passing, perhaps through brief conversation. However casual the meeting might have been, it ended with him walking her home. According to investigators, she led him into her Southwest Park Avenue apartment sometime that evening. It was a decision she never had the chance to take back. Court records and autopsy findings would later confirm the grim truth. Kirkland raped Jaime. Once inside her apartment, he assaulted her, and in a shocking escalation of violence, he used a piece of her own clothing to strangle her. The final moments of Jaime's life, spent in fear, confusion, and helpless struggle, are difficult to fully grasp. There were no witnesses, no rescue, no last-minute intervention. She was bound, gagged, and then silenced forever. Medical examiners confirmed that the cause of death was asphyxiation. But it didn't end there. After the murder, Kirkland desecrated her body. He didn't just leave her dead, he left her mutilated. Jaime's remains bore the marks of someone who went beyond killing. What exactly he did after she died remains sealed behind the respectful silence of redacted reports. But it was enough to bring a charge of abuse of a corpse. Proof that even death did not spare Jaime from Kirkland's cruelty. It's a detail that sickened even seasoned law enforcement. He then fled the apartment, leaving her body behind in the bathroom. There were no calls to 911, no note, no sign of remorse, only a woman, lifeless and brutalized, left to be found hours later in what should have been the sanctuary of her own home. On Christmas, in silence. Her worst fear had come true. A family member would later say that Jaime's greatest nightmare was being raped and murdered. And no one knew. The lights on her Christmas tree still twinkled. Her gifts, wrapped and untouched, sat in place, waiting. Outside, neighbors shared meals, laughter, joy. Inside, in the shadows of her apartment, Jaime lay dead. The contrast is unbearable. Even after the horror he inflicted, Kirkland didn't go into hiding. He walked back to his apartment just a few blocks away. He lived among the people of Portland for days, passing strangers on the street, maybe even walking past those searching for answers. He kept his distance, he kept quiet, and he waited for the world to catch up. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was brutality, pure and simple, violence, calculated and carried out without reason or restraint. And as Portland prepared to move into a new year, one family was left to face the reality that their red sunshine would never come home again. The call came in at around 10 p.m. on Christmas night. Officers were dispatched to the Park Terrace Apartments on Southwest Park Avenue after someone reported the unthinkable. A woman had been found dead in her unit. That woman was 33-year-old Jaime Larson. What first responders encountered wasn't an accident or an overdose. There was no sign of self-harm. From the moment they stepped through her door, the truth was undeniable. This wasn't a death. It was a homicide. The small bathroom where Jaime's body was found told a story of violence. Her remains, bruised and battered, bore signs of struggle and cruelty. Bound, strangled, defiled. The brutality was evident. She had been attacked with overwhelming force and disturbing intent, and whoever had done it had vanished without a trace. Portland homicide detectives and forensic specialists were immediately called in. The crime scene was sealed. Evidence teams worked through the night, combing every inch of the apartment for hair fibers, fingerprints, and DNA. The bathroom became ground zero for what would become one of the city's most urgent manhunts. There were no forced entry signs, no broken locks or shattered windows. That suggested something even more chilling. She had likely let her killer in. Investigators believed she knew him, at least briefly. The time between their meeting and her death was narrow, but long enough for horror to unfold. The apartment yielded enough forensics to give detectives a starting point. Biological evidence and trace DNA narrowed their focus. Whatever Kirkland had touched or left behind, he didn't clean it up. His DNA, or what was believed to be his, was now part of the investigation. Leads came in fast. Within days, detectives had a name: Michael James Kirkland, age 39, a man with a past, a man who lived only blocks away from Jaime. He was already on law enforcement radar for previous assault charges. Now, he was the prime suspect in the murder of a young woman on Christmas night. But Kirkland had disappeared. He wasn't answering his door. He wasn't at work. He wasn't turning himself in. So, the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force was called in. What followed was a coordinated, high-stakes pursuit. Authorities surveilled Kirkland's known locations, followed tips, and tracked his patterns. The search intensified daily. And then, on January 3rd, 2013, just 9 days after the murder and mere hours after Jaime's family held a memorial in her honor, the Marshals made their move. Kirkland was arrested at his home on Southwest Clay Street, not far from where the crime took place. He was taken into custody without incident. He didn't run across state lines. He didn't hide in the woods. He stayed right there, in the same city, in the same neighborhood, close to the scene of his crime. It's a haunting detail that still rattles those who lived nearby. By the time of his arrest, Jaime had already been laid to rest. Her family, still deep in mourning, had gathered that very day to honor her memory. And as they spoke her name through tears, the man accused of taking her life was being quietly led away in handcuffs. The relief of his capture did not erase the pain, but it marked the beginning of justice. Kirkland was booked. The charges were severe: aggravated murder, rape, abuse of a corpse, burglary, theft. The manhunt was over, but the path toward answers had only just begun. On August 11th, 2014, over a year and a half after Jaime Lynn Larson was raped, strangled, and left for dead in her own bathroom, Michael James Kirkland finally stood in court to face what he had done. Gone was the manhunt. Gone was the anonymity. He was no longer a suspect. He was the man who had confessed. In a quiet courtroom filled with purple, Jaime's favorite color, Kirkland changed his plea. Guilty to everything. Aggravated murder, strangulation, rape, abuse of a corpse, burglary, theft. The plea deal removed the death penalty from the table in return for admitting his crimes. For many, it felt like the only practical path forward. The evidence was overwhelming. The family deserved closure. And the state of Oregon rarely pursued capital punishment, even in the most gruesome cases. But when the courtroom filled with Jaime's loved ones, there was no sense of relief. The emotional toll was raw, visible, and irreversible. Family members took turns delivering impact statements that struck through the air like broken glass. One said, "Because of Michael Kirkland, my mother cries every day. Her youngest child is raped, murdered, and mutilated. Because of Michael Kirkland, my sister Tara cries every day." Another added, "My cousin Jaime's worst fear was being raped and murdered. That's exactly what happened to her." They spoke of Jaime's laughter, her quiet joy, her love for photography. They spoke of Christmases that would never be the same, and how the day meant to celebrate life had now become a lifelong symbol of loss. One relative described their grief as a puzzle torn into 1,000,000 pieces, shattered beyond repair. Another said the nightmares wouldn't stop, that no amount of sentencing would ever bring the family back to who they were before December 25th, 2012. And then came the moment everyone dreaded, Kirkland's statement through his attorney. Mr. Kirkland is extremely remorseful for what occurred. Might not seem to you at times that he is, but he truly is. There was no apology from Kirkland himself, no spoken words, just silence, blank expression, no visible emotion. To many in that courtroom, it wasn't remorse, it was detachment, cowardice. The public response reflected the same disbelief. In news comment sections, on forums, and in whispers around Portland, the consensus was simple. Remorse should not be this easy. A man who raped, murdered, and desecrated a woman on Christmas Day could not wash it all away with a guilty plea and a silent courtroom appearance. Yet legally, the case was over. Kirkland would serve the rest of his life behind bars. He would not walk the streets again. He would never see another Christmas outside prison walls. He would die in a cell. But what justice means is different for everyone. So while the court closed the file, the grief stayed wide open. And for everyone in that courtroom wearing purple, the cracks from that day would never fully heal. Jaime wasn't famous, she wasn't rich or powerful, but she was deeply loved, she mattered. And that's exactly why her story must be told, not for shock, not for spectacle, but because she represents so many others whose names the world never hears. Women who are followed home, women who are taken on ordinary days, in ordinary places, by predators hiding in plain sight. Her legacy is also a reminder, a warning. The illusion of safety is easy to believe in when things feel normal. But safety, as this case proved, can vanish in a single night, in a matter of hours, in the hands of a stranger you didn't even know the day before. Jaime did everything right. She was kind, grounded, living a normal life in a quiet apartment in a decent neighborhood. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't out chasing danger. She was home for the holidays, surrounded by decorations, gifts, and plans for the year ahead. And none of it saved her. Her death is a brutal reminder that danger doesn't always knock. It sometimes walks quietly beside you waiting. If Jaime's story moved you, if her light, her life, her loss stirred something deep in you, don't let it end here. Share her name. Talk about her story. Stand up for the silent. Because justice isn't just the courtroom. It's remembrance. It's awareness. It's action. And if we forget Jaime Lynn Larson, who else might we forget?